Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop and welcome for our next installment of the Ford table. So as you can see here, I've got the table semi together. The top's not glued on. Got it glued up, got the breadboard ends on it. The base is glued up. That's what we're going to be covering in this video. So we've got jigs made to do the taper at the bottom of the legs, rounding over all of the legs, doing the sanding of the legs and the rails, doing our final glue up so that the base is glued up and all together. We've got our top glued up. Video we're going to cover doing the breadboard ends. Got tongue and groove for the breadboard ends that are on here. Next video coming up, we'll be doing our ebony splines. So that's one reason the top's not on. We've got our ebony splines to do. So routing the groove in here to do the ebony. We've got our ebony to do in the plugs on the ends, our ebony to do still on our legs, and then we've got our inlays to do in the top. So I talk about it in the video, but the initial inlays that I did in the top didn't come out the way I wanted them to. So I'm working with a 3D graphic artist that did up some 3D plans for me, or 3D files, so that I can import them into the CNC. I'm going to carve out the rose petals with the 3D carving and then be inlaying those into the top. So in the original table, which I'll put a picture up here in the upper right hand corner of the original table and how the inlays are, there's supposed to be rose petals that have fallen and landed on the table. So they sit a little bit proud from the top, about a 1/16 inch. So we're going to get those going. And it was the upper right hand corner, so I raised my left hand, so ignore me. So that's what they're supposed to look like. Supposed to look like rose petals that have fallen onto the table. So with those 3D carved, they're going to stand a little proud from the table, but they're going to have contours in them from the 3D carving so that they look like actual rose petals. And those are made out of koa wood and white oak, whereas we have a mahogany top. So those are going to give a real nice contrast and are going to just really beautify this piece. So stick around, watch the video, watch how we've got all this together to this point. I've got one coat of finish on the top, as you see. It's not the natural bare mahogany anymore. I wanted to get a coat of finish on it to at least seal it. This is a Livos oil based finish, rubbed on both sides. Always make sure that you put your finishes on both sides of a piece or on all sides of a piece. If you leave one side bare wood and you finish the other side, the moisture is going to absorb into the wood differently, and you can get bowing and cupping and have it affect your piece. So always make sure that you finish all sides of a piece. So I wanted to get at least one coat on this to get everything sealed up. So that's where we're at this point. So let's get out into the shop, get working, get the roundovers done, get the tapers done, and get this stuff all glued up. See you in the shop. So here we are out at the router table. What we're going to be doing is putting a taper on the bottoms of the legs here. There's a portion at the bottom of the legs that tapers down. So I have a pattern bit here, and again, made a template on the CNC that has that taper on it. We clamp them down here, use a pattern bit on the router table. You can see the bearing there on the bottom that rides against the template. And then we just take out that material. Because of the height of the piece, it's 3 inches, I believe it's 3 inches wide. Of course, the bit's not that tall. So I made an opposing jig that's a mirror image of the other one so that we can flip the piece over and get the other side of the leg that we didn't get with the first portion. So that goes ahead, takes that, flip it over, and we'll get the other side and it gets it all cleaned up. My stops that I had put on the jig were a little bit off and was allowing a little bit to be taken off the bottom, so that's what you saw me doing there. I just was using a piece of flat wood to line it up with the end. There was a little step there that it wasn't getting all of it, so just making sure that it's lined up with the front of the template. Flip it over, do the same thing, get the other side. And if there's a little bit of line and unevenness, you can always clean that up with sandpaper. So here we are starting to do some roundovers. So this is one of the breadboard ends for the table. So I've got a 1/4 inch roundover bit in there for the breadboard ends for the top. And now I'm putting an 1/8 inch roundover in. Just seeing which cover fits. Get that in. Now the vacuum's on. So there it's just a test to make sure that the bit's at the right height so it doesn't leave like a line behind. Here I'm going to close up my opening a little bit to try and get the vacuum to suck that stuff in a little more. So the rest of the breadboard end gets an 1/8 inch round over it on it. The 1/4 inch just goes on those outside corners. The rest of it is an 1/8 inch round over. So we get that on the whole piece. Again, with the Greene and Greene stuff, everything has a round over and the edges are quote unquote broken. There's no sharp corners on everything. Everything is hand sanded or rounded over and then sanded. And all of the edges are eased to give that worn look that the pieces have been around for a long time. Even the original stuff is that way. If you go to the Gamble House or the Huntington Library and see any of the original Greene and Greene pieces, you'll notice that they all have that round over to them. So here we are with the legs, and we're going to put the roundovers on all of the outside corners of the legs, so they have a nice little smooth round over on them. And then over here to the breadboard ends again. So on the ends of the breadboard ends, I'm going to make a slot by drilling a few holes right next to each other. So on these breadboard ends, they go cross grain to your flat top, and the top is going to want to expand back and forth with seasonal changes, humidity changes. So you want to make sure that when you attach a breadboard end, it doesn't get glued all the way across, and we'll talk about that when we're putting them on. But what we do when we install the breadboard end is only the center gets glued and a center screw gets put in. And then on the outside edges, there's a slot that's cut in there, so the screw will go in the middle, but it's a slotted hole in the breadboard end so that as the top expands and contracts, that screw can move back and forth inside that slot on the breadboard end. So the breadboard end stays nice and tight, it keeps your top flat, but with only the center being permanently glued and attached, it allows the outsides to move with the seasons, and that way your top's not going to split. If you were to glue that breadboard end all the way across, when you get your seasonal changes, at some point you're going to hear what sounds like a gunshot, and it's because it didn't have anywhere to go, so the grain, it just cracks, and that's what happens with your top. So there you can see it. It's a good view of that. And then right there in the middle, just a single screw hole to put those screws in. So here you can see how I did the breadboard ends. So I have these bits, tongue and groove bits. So on the one side, we put the tongue, and on the other side, we put the groove. So we have the groove bit there. That put the groove in the center of the breadboard end. And then on the top itself, we used the tongue bit, and that made that tongue on the end of the top. So here we're going to come through and sand everything. The concave nature of the legs there were kind of the exact same radius as the they were the exact same radius as the 6-inch sander there. So it allowed me to kind of tilt it up a little bit and get that radius in there. What I also found here for this more tight radius is these Surf Prep sanders. That foam pad there was awesome for doing this. Was able to push down the foam pad, fills all the way down and matches the contour of what you're sanding. So for moldings, or in this case where it was concave, the foam sanding pad went all the way down into that concave section. And then here, just taking some hand sandpaper and cleaning up that round over that we sanded in. So we get a nice hand sanded look, nice round over, nice worn look to it. You can see that taper down at the bottom where it tapers in on the sides and ends. So a lot of sanding work, a lot of hand sanding goes into it to make sure that everything is right where you want it to be. So we get this all sanded and cleaned up. You can see our ebony holes there for the ebony plugs that are going to go in. Again, get it all sanded, get those lines out of it so that everything blends real smoothly. You don't see real definite lines from where the router bit was. You can sand all of that stuff out. Again, I can't say enough about these Surf Prep sanders, especially this one with the foam pad. It makes doing radiuses and moldings and everything else super easy to sand without having to take a small piece of sandpaper in your hand and do every little groove and crack. It really cuts down on some of that sanding time when you have profiles or different things that you need to sand that otherwise would be a ton of work and take a ton of time, which sanding does anyway when you're doing it right. But you want to make sure that you got everything cleaned up, all of those lines out of it, just cleaning everything up. Sometimes you go to put things and you see a little line or a little something that you missed, and so just making sure that's all cleaned up and all the edges are broken smoothly and well. So once we've got all the legs sanded, now we're going to bring in the rails, get the rails. I'm going to be sanding off my marks there so you can see on the end there. I put that little B for bottom arrow pointing up, so just when I go to put these together, I know which orientation to put them in. So you want to make sure you're sanding out all of the saw marks, all of your marks that you put on with any type of pencil or writing. And once we got all that sanded, we're going to go ahead and start putting things together. So here, when I initially was building the piece and starting to put in my mortises for the legs, I put these mortises in the wrong place. So this is a little way that you can clean up those mistakes. This is on an inside piece that is right under the top and it's facing the inside of the table. So unless you're laying on the ground under the table, looking up at this, you're never going to see it. So that's why I chose, instead of making whole new legs, I just plugged these so that they're plugged solid and the wood's solid. But it's called a Dutchman is one of the terms for it. But just because you make a mistake and mess something up, same thing here. I started to do it and then realized I was in the wrong place. So that's why this one's so much shallower. So I just made these plugs, round over on the two sides, glue those in, took it over to the bandsaw and took off most of the material, and then here just sanding it out flush. So again, just because you may route something in wrong sometimes, don't worry about it. You can always fix it. You can always clean it up. This is true even in a face piece. You can take a lot of time and find a piece that has matching grain, and you can go ahead with that face piece where you've matched the grain, glue it in. If you make it a little snug when you tap it in and it's glued in, a lot of times no one's ever going to even notice that it's there. So now we're going to start gluing up the base and making the final glue up and getting the base all together so that it's glued up in a solid piece.
So then I'm just making sure that the mortises are clean enough, that the tenons are going to go into them. You can see I've already glued the tenons into the rails. I went ahead and glued those up ahead of time and let them dry so that I'm not trying to get the glue and everything into the two pieces. Here, I realized I had left the tenons a little long, so went over to the sander, got those cleaned up so that they wouldn't bottom out and keep the rail from sitting where it's supposed to sit. So here we are, we're going to get this piece glued in. Again, just taking it over and cleaning it up on the sander. I think actually I took it to the chop saw there and chopped off a little bit of the overhang where it was bottoming out. So here we're putting the top piece in. Again, got the mortise and tenons are nice and snug. So we're tapping those in, and you can see the housed mortises and tenons there going in because of that curved concave portion. Yeah, I realized I was putting, that's what it is. I was putting those short rails in the end, which the end's a little longer. Those short rails go in between across the front and back. It goes the short rails, then the longer center ones. But from front to back, it's those rails that you see there in the upper right corner. Those are the ones for the ends. So luckily, before I got too far and got too much glued up, I realized that I was putting those in the wrong spot. So here we've got them in the right spot, just trying to get everything lined up and get all the rails glued up in the right spots. Just getting the glue on the two sides, using a brush there to get it spread out right. Make sure that we've got good contact. Again, rails in there. Now we're going to put the next one on. So glue on in the mortise. Get it all spread around with the brush there. I'm going to brush some onto the tenons so that we're getting good contact between all of the parts. And I realized, oh, put the glue on the wrong portion. Get that glue cleaned off. Had I done it where I originally put the glue in the tenons, the ebony slots would have been facing the wrong direction. They would have been facing back towards me. So, caught that in time, so not a big deal. So just trying to get everything lined up and in the right spot. All right, so now we've got it in the right spot and got it cleaned up. Now I can get that rail tapped up to where it's supposed to be. So I think on one side the mortise was a little longer than the other. So up at the top there, with the way the tenon was, it wouldn't allow the rail to slide up where it's supposed to be. So now we got that, we got it tapped in. Got to make sure that the housed part of the mortise is all the way in so that everything is where it should be. And this is kind of the trial and error and fit and finish of doing all this, is making sure that everything lines up and that we get it all put together right. When I did the dry fit and the test fit, the loose tenons that I used were real small, so there wasn't any issue at the tops or bottoms with moving stuff around, because I was just using real small pieces of wood that didn't take up the whole mortise. Here you can see those loose tenons are much longer in the mortises. So on my rails, the mortise might be a little longer or might be a little offset from what's in the leg. So sometimes on some of these I had to make a little bit of adjustment to the mortise, or I'm sorry, to the tenon, so that it fit in the way that it was supposed to. So here again, just getting everything, making sure that they line up. Need to cut them down a little bit, so took them over to the chop saw, just cut off a little bit. Now we're back. Glue into the mortises there. This time we paid attention so that we know that we're putting the rails into the proper alignment of the legs. So we got this front and back section here. So we're getting these all together first. So what we're going to do is glue up a little sub-assembly here. So we're going to do the end sections where it has the front to back rail and the smaller sections of the front rail, and then we're going to glue up the entire thing in one piece after we got the sub-assemblies done. That way we're not trying to glue everything and clamp everything, because if you try and do too big of a glue up at one time and your glue starts to set up on you and doesn't stay tacky and it starts to set up, you're going to have a starved glue joint. Here we're getting our ends together. We'll get those glued up and let them set up and dry. So we bring that in again, put some clamping pads there so that when we clamp down, we don't leave dents in the mahogany. Again, mahogany is considered a hardwood, but it is kind of soft if you have those hard plastic corners of the clamps and you're clamping down. So some little MDF clamp pads there, keep that. So then after those two sub-assemblies dried, now we're putting together the end assembly of it. And sorry that I'm in the way there. I wasn't thinking. I should have put the camera on the other side, but learning curves. So here, and then as you notice, as I crank down, that top closes in a little bit. So what I did was measure up there, and I made some spacers that are going to keep that top open where I want it to be. So here, even though I'm blocking it with my body, using tape measure to measure what that dimension is between the front and back legs, so that I can cut some spacers and put up on the part that's up on the top to just keep that distance where we want it to be. So got those little spacers in there. That'll keep the distance between those center rails the same as it is on the end rails and the end legs there down at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and set this one aside, and then we'll do up the other one. Bring my clamps over, and as I'm throwing the clamp pads all over the shop, we'll pick those up. Get those in place, and then we're going to do the same thing with the other end assembly. So our sub-assemblies that we'd already glued up, again, we'll go ahead and, as you can see, those are those end rails that I was talking about that are a little bit longer than the short ones. So we'll get those put together. Again, had to take them over to the chop saw and just chop a little bit off the ends. Left them a little long when I made them. So get those chopped down and cleaned up. Here I'm just making sure that they line up where they're supposed to. If not, then I go over to the bandsaw, clean them up a little bit. Sorry for kicking the camera there. Get our glue into our mortises again. And we're just taking this slow, doing all of our assemblies. Tight Bond 3 has a pretty good open time to it. So, but like I said, I still like to space it out a little bit and get the sub-assemblies done first so that we're not fighting the glue setting up on us too quick. So again, got it in the mortises, brush a little bit onto the tendons, get it spread out on the tendons. Get that put down. Again, find the mallet, because as you probably know, when you set something down, it's never where you set it. So then you got to go look for it. Get a little glue on our tenons on the top. Then we'll put this assembly together, and we'll do the same thing that we did a minute ago with that other one. Get it into the clamps, and then we'll put some spacers on the top part to keep our distance consistent and have the glue dry up so that everything's straight where it's supposed to be. Then in that bottom leg in the back there, you can see the Dutchman that I put in there to fill that mortise that I had cut into the wrong place. But again, that's underneath the top right there. The top's going to be covering where it says the FR and the RMR, so that's front right, and then right middle rear, and so on. And then again, spacers in, keep our distance consistent between the front and back legs so that everything stays where it's supposed to be. Then we'll let that glue dry. All right, so we've got our sub-assemblies have dried up, and now it is time to assemble the rest of the table. So again, we get some glue into our mortises, glue onto our tenons, and get these in where they need to go. Use our glue brush there. These little acid glue brushes are pretty helpful. So we're going to get this set where it needs to be. Nice thing about having nice snug tenons with your mortise, as you go to put it in, they stay in place. They're not going to just drop out of the table. And these are pretty long pieces, so you can tell that the mortise and tenons were nice and snug. Be able to see it here on this top one. So even with me tapping those top ones in, you can see the bottom ones haven't fallen out. See our centerpiece here, that cloud lift in the middle section of the table on the rails. Got some really, really pretty mahogany here. I'm getting this piece all put together. So now again, a little bit of glue on the tenons there. Just making sure that everything is coated in glue. It's gonna give good contact surface. And here we are, bring everything together. And just remember the adage that you can never have too many clamps. You will always need one more than you have. But we had plenty here. It wasn't a problem. Oops, that clamp was not long enough. So let's go get out the Big Daddies. Get our clamp on so that we can start to pull this together, pull everything into place. These little mallets come in handy. They've got two sides to them. They have the soft side and a hard side. Use the hard side for tapping in ebony and the soft side for anything else I have to do so that you don't mar your work surface. So we got the one side somewhat set. Now we're going to come and get our other side set. And again, see how snug that mortise and tenon is. I was just trying to use the mallet to kind of tap it up, but either going in just a little bit crooked or just can't get the tap on it with the hammer that way that I need. So again, apologize for being in front of the camera. Use the mallet there, try to tap it up, doesn't want to go. Take the clamp off, see if that'll help. Couple of little come to Jesus taps, still doesn't budge. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the table down flat, which will give me a little better leverage on the pieces to make sure that everything's lined up and in place. So you can see there with my finger where I feel the top to make sure that the piece is lined up with the top and it's not proud or below the top of the leg. So again, got the clamping pads out. I want to make sure that we don't mar our legs. And again, it's just, running your finger over it. Your finger can feel about 5/1000ths of an inch. So it's feeling it, make sure that it's lined up. Everything's where you want it to be. So you're not trying to hand plane down or sand down a bunch of stuff because your rails and legs weren't lined up. So I got the top one where I want it. We're going to come down and make sure that the bottom one's all lined up where it's supposed to be. Everything's snugged up and looking good. So just checking everything, seeing if there's glue squeeze out to clean up, which on the bottom section there's a little bit. Again, here we're going to put in those spacers to keep our distance consistent between the front and back. We want to make sure that we don't have any concave stuff or anything bowed. And here we are just, adding some clamps, just making sure that everything stays nice and square. So these clamps here span the entire table. So we're just trying to make sure that everything's together, pulled up nice and tight. Everything's glued well. So here the glue's all dry, so time to remove the clamps. And instead of being lazy, I'm actually carrying them over and putting them back in the clamp rack as I go, instead of my usual have a pile of clamps sitting on the floor right there next to them, and then I bump them and they fall over on my foot, and I'm mad about it, but it's my own fault because I left them. So you can see the table coming together. Now we're getting everything taken off, and you can really see what a beautiful piece this table is. The concave nature of those legs is just such a cool design element, as opposed to just, 4 flat rectangles, or actually 8 flat rectangles. You see how it just adds another dimension to the table. So here we've got the top. Top's all glued up. Spending the time sanding it, making sure that the top's nice and smooth. The seams and stuff, you can't see any space in any of the seams. So we're just going to take our time sanding. We want to make sure that We don't leave glue on the table or any other type of impurities that's going to mess with our finish, or that's going to cause a rough surface when you run your hand over it. So it's just getting it all cleaned up. So making sure the edge is nice and sanded. Going to flip it over and do the other side. And you'll get a chance to see the inlays in the top of the table. I ended up not being happy with these. When I cut around them with the CNC, you can kind of see a little outline. Those two leaves that are in the bottom corner there, closest to you, you can kind of see the outline from the 1/8 inch bit that went around them. So when I sanded those out, it gave little divots. And when I put a little bit of finish on, you could see those divots. So I wasn't happy with those, so I sanded those out and redid the top. And the next video, we're going to had a graphic artist make up some 3D petals for me. Those are actually supposed to be rose petals that have fallen and are laying on the ground or laying on the tabletop on the original. So I got with a 3D graphic artist that made up 3D program for me, and I'm going to 3D carve the rose petals and then inlay them into the top. So that'll be in the next video, as well as routing into the edges of the table for the ebony splines that are going to cover the gap between the breadboard and the table itself. So you see it going on. You see those 3 screws there. So like we talked about earlier, having the screw in the center and then the 2 end ones that will allow the top to expand and contract.
Hey everyone, so thanks for hanging out. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video to this point. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, all of that good stuff. Please leave a comment if there's something you want to see, if there's stuff you have questions about. I try and get back to those as quick as I can, but we really appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. We've got the next segment in the Ford table coming up soon. Sorry that it took a couple weeks for the video to come out. We had some stuff going on, some technical issues, some family issues and other stuff, but we've got everything worked out. Got some new software for the editing that'll work with the upgrade in the camera to the 4K. So hopefully that's all worked out now. We're going to be switching our videos to coming out on Fridays instead of Mondays. It works better with my daughter's schedule. She's the one that does the editing and stuff for me. She's my partner in this endeavor. So with her schedule, it works better for us to release them on Fridays. So the next video will be coming out on Friday. I'm doing a set of Limbert style table lamps. Well, they're reproduction Limbert table lamps. So we'll have that coming up in the next video. And the one after that should be the next step in the series with the Ford table here, getting this other stuff finished up and getting the table finished up and ready for delivery. So thanks again for taking your time. I know your time's valuable and it's the one commodity we can't get back. So it means a lot to us that you spend that time with us watching our videos and watching what we're doing. Hope that it helps. Hope that we can help you in any way possible. Again, please leave a message, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you next week.